If that thing bites me, I'm gonna bite it back! That was the first thing Hank Walker said the moment he heard the whimpering sound come from behind the row of dumpsters behind the Quick Mart. He stood there, clutching a half-empty travel mug of lukewarm gas station coffee, staring at the cracked green bins that reeked of old lettuce and something less identifiable. It was barely past 7 in the morning, and the town of Ridgely, Tennessee, was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. The sound came again, soft, high-pitched, and shaky, like something too small to be making it, and too scared to stop. Hank had only come out back to toss away the crusty sandwich wrapper from his morning ritual, a turkey and Swiss on white that the clerk, Marty, always set aside for him. But now he stood frozen, listening. After a long pause, he set down the coffee on the metal stairs and took a step forward. His boots crunched on broken glass and gravel. "All right," he said to the air. "I'm not looking to get rabies today, so let's keep this civil." Hank bent over, peering between the bins. The whimpering stopped. Silence stretched. Then, just as he started to stand back up, something moved. A quick, jerky scuffle behind the farthest dumpster. He approached slowly, hands up like he was negotiating with a wild animal, which, he figured, he might be. When he got around the last dumpster, he stopped. There, huddled against the cold concrete wall, was a small dog. Thin, shaggy. Its fur was matted with dirt and oil, and its ribs showed clear through the mess. It looked up at him with eyes too big for its face, eyes that held every ounce of fear, confusion, and maybe just a spark of something else. "Well, would you look at you?" Hank muttered. "You're about 3 bad days away from disappearing." He crouched slowly. The dog didn't run, just shook. Its breath came out in little puffs of steam in the chilly morning air. Hank scanned the area. No collar, no leash. Nothing but a torn piece of shoelace around its neck like someone once tried to keep it, then gave up. "All right, buddy," Hank said. "I ain't exactly the poster boy for warm welcomes either, but I figure we could both use a win." He pulled off the flannel jacket tied around his waist and held it out like a blanket. The dog didn't move. He inched closer. Still nothing. "Okay, so you're not the biting type. Good start." He reached out and gently draped the flannel over the little creature, then scooped it up. It weighed almost nothing. A sack of bones wrapped in fur. Back in his truck, a dusty silver Dodge Dakota with more miles than paint, he set the bundled dog in the passenger seat. It didn't protest, just trembled quietly. "You ride shotgun now," Hank said. "And if you puke, you're paying for a detail." He pulled out onto the road, coffee forgotten. The town drifted past, a few sleepy gas stations, a high school football sign still showing the score from Friday's game, and a row of shuttered storefronts that hadn't seen customers in years. When Hank pulled into the gravel drive of his modest one-story house, the sun had finally broken over the hills. He parked the truck, climbed out, then opened the passenger door slowly. "All right, pal. Welcome to Casa de Hank." The dog didn't move. "You're not dead, are you?" A twitch of an ear. "Good enough?" He carried the dog inside, straight into the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old pine wood. It was clean enough, with a simple table, 2 chairs, and an old recliner that had seen every Super Bowl since 1993. He laid the dog gently on a folded towel on the floor and rummaged through the fridge. He came back with a leftover piece of chicken, cold but not spoiled. He held it out. The dog sniffed. Then, slowly, carefully, took it. Thought so. Starving. After it ate, Hank filled a bowl with water and set it down. The dog lapped at it like it hadn't had water in days. He sat back on his heels and watched. You got a name? No? Well, we'll fix that later. The dog finished drinking, then looked up at him. There was a long pause where nothing moved. Then, slowly, it inched forward and rested its chin on Hank's knee. He didn't move. Not right away. Then, without a word, he reached down and gave the dog the gentlest scratch behind the ears. You're lucky I didn't find you last year, he said. Back then, I wouldn't have cared. He didn't explain. Didn't need to. The dog just sighed and closed its eyes. Hank sat there for a while, longer than he meant to. The morning drifted on, sunlight warming the kitchen tiles, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so empty. Over the next few days, the dog, who Hank started calling Lucky, began to change. At first it was small things, a tail wag, a curious glance at the television, a little bark when the mail truck drove by. Hank found himself talking more, telling Lucky about his day, about the customers who came into the hardware store where he worked part-time, about how the clerk at the gas station was always whistling through his teeth and didn't even notice. Lucky listened. Sometimes Hank would catch himself mid-sentence, realize he was telling a dog about a leaky faucet or a cranky neighbor, and just shake his head. I must be losing it, he'd mutter. But Lucky didn't seem to mind. One evening, about a week after finding Lucky, Hank came home from work and found the dog sitting at the window, watching the driveway. As soon as the truck pulled in, Lucky stood, tail wagging hard. You waiting on me now? Hank asked, stepping inside. Lucky barked once, then jumped up with surprising energy. Well, I'll be... You really are lucky. But Hank knew better. He was the lucky one. He'd come back from the Marines 5 years ago, retired early. Too many bad memories, too many nights spent wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. He'd lost touch with old friends. The house got quieter. Days got longer. He didn't talk about those years. No one asked. But now, every morning, he had a reason to get up. Lucky needed food, water, walks, and so did Hank. They started walking around the block every evening. Neighbors began waving. Some came over to ask about the dog. Found him behind a dumpster, Hank would say. Best thing I ever dug out of the trash. People laughed. A few dropped off treats. One lady brought an old dog bed she didn't use anymore. Lucky started gaining weight. His coat looked healthier. He wagged more, barked more, played. And Hank? Hank started smiling again. Then one Saturday morning, Hank got a call from the VFW hall. They were short one volunteer for a fundraiser booth at the county fair. I ain't much for crowds, Hank said. You can bring your dog, the man said. That gave him pause. Lucky barked from the recliner. Hank sighed. All right, but only 'cause he wants to. At the fair, Lucky was a hit. Kids petted him. Folks asked his story. Hank told it. And something strange happened. People listened. They didn't look away when he mentioned the Marines. Didn't change the subject when he brought up the hard years. They listened, and Hank talked. That night, back home, Lucky curled up on the bed beside him. Hank looked down, scratching the dog's ears. You dragged me out of that dumpster too, didn't you, boy? Lucky licked his hand. And Hank, who hadn't cried in 15 years, felt something stir. He didn't wipe it away, because sometimes the smallest rescues turn out to be the biggest saves. Hank hadn't planned to become a regular at the county park, but somehow, every afternoon around 4, he found himself tossing an old tennis ball near the pond, while Lucky tore off after it like he was auditioning for the Olympics. The mutt had filled out nicely since the dumpster days. His coat still had that wild, shaggy charm, but now it gleamed a little in the sunlight, and his ribs were no longer visible. He had that spring in his step, that happy pant dogs get when they've had enough good meals and know they're safe. The regulars at the park started to know them by name. Well, mostly by Lucky's name. Hank was fine being the guy with the dog. There was a retired couple who walked laps around the pond every day. The husband always wore suspenders over a clean white shirt and waved like they'd been neighbors for years. There was also the kid who came with his granddad to feed the ducks, and who now always saved a couple bits of bread crust for Lucky. And then there was Ron, the park maintenance guy, who liked to lean on his rake and shoot the breeze whenever Hank passed by. "That dog's got more fans than the Titans," Ron said one day, chuckling. Hank shrugged. "He's got more personality, too." Ron laughed and nodded. "Ain't that the truth?" Lucky came bounding back with the tennis ball, dropped it at Hank's feet, then immediately sneezed. Twice. "You all right, Fuzzball?" Hank asked, ruffling the dog's ears. Lucky barked, wagged his tail, and ran in a circle, ready for the next throw. By the time they walked home, the sun was dipping low. The streets of Ridgely glowed gold and quiet, and Hank found himself looking forward to the evenings. He hadn't felt that in a long time. There was always something about dusk, the way it used to press down on him, filling his chest with that heavy sort of silence. But now, with Lucky trotting beside him, leash swinging gently between them, it felt different. He wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward something. Back at the house, Hank took to preparing Lucky's meals like it was some kind of art. Chicken, rice, the occasional scrambled egg. Once he even tried adding a little pumpkin like the guy at the pet store suggested. Lucky licked the bowl clean every time. "You eat better than I do," Hank said one night as Lucky burped and plopped down on the rug with a satisfied grunt. There was a knock on the front door not long after that. Hank wasn't expecting anyone, and folks in Ridgely didn't do surprise visits unless something was wrong. He opened the door to find Sheriff Raymond standing on the porch, holding a clipboard, and looking like he'd come straight from church. "Evening, Hank." "Sheriff, everything all right?" Raymond smiled. "More than all right. Mind if I come in?" "Sure." Hank stepped aside, and the sheriff walked in, tipping his hat slightly. Lucky padded over, tail wagging cautiously. "So this is the celebrity," Raymond said, squatting to give Lucky a scratch. "He's bigger than I thought." "He's all fluff," Hank replied. "What's this about?" Raymond stood and handed him the clipboard. "There's an outreach program the county's starting. Veterans and shelter dogs. Some folks from the community center thought you and Lucky here might be the face of it." Hank blinked. "The face of it?" "They want a local story. Something real. A man who found hope in a dog." "I didn't sign up for anything like that." "You didn't have to," Raymond said gently. "Sometimes the best stories are the ones people didn't plan to tell." Hank looked at the clipboard. There were forms, a couple of release statements, and a photo request. He set it down on the coffee table. "I'll think about it." "That's fair," the sheriff said. "They're not looking to exploit anything, Hank. They just want people to see what's possible." Hank nodded slowly. Lucky had settled at his feet. "I'll let you know," Hank said. "Take your time." "And Hank? Yeah? It's a good thing you did, picking up that dog. Real good thing." After Raymond left, Hank sat for a long while, absently scratching Lucky's back. He thought about the outreach program, about being the face of something. He didn't feel like a symbol. He still had rough nights, dreams that jolted him awake, moments when the quiet pressed in too tight. But Lucky was always there, just a heartbeat away. He looked down at the dog and chuckled. "We're gonna be on a brochure, huh? Might need to brush your teeth, bud." That night, Hank lay in bed listening to the soft snore of fur and contentment curled up on the floor. He didn't sleep much, but it wasn't the bad kind of insomnia anymore. It was thoughtful, reflective, the kind that lets you remember without pain. The next morning, Hank drove down to the community center. He hadn't been inside in years. The last time had been for a town meeting about road repairs, and he'd left early. But this time, he walked in and was greeted by a woman named Peggy, who looked like she ran the whole place with just a clipboard and a smile. "You must be Hank," she said. "And Lucky?" Lucky barked. "We've heard a lot about you two." They took a photo in front of the big mural near the entrance, a colorful painting of Ridgely's hills, river, and townsfolk. Lucky sat proud, tongue hanging out. Hank tried not to look awkward. They interviewed him next. Just a few questions: how he found the dog, how things had changed. He kept it simple. "I found him. He found me back. We've been figuring it out ever since." Peggy nodded and smiled. "That's perfect." By the time they left, Hank had 3 flyers, a local reporter's card, and a promise of a free grooming session for Lucky. He clipped the flyer to the fridge later, not because he wanted to look at himself every morning, but because Lucky looked so happy in the picture. A week later, a letter came in the mail. Hank didn't get much mail, usually just utility bills and the occasional catalog from places he never shopped. But this one was handwritten. The envelope was neat, and the return address was local. Inside was a note from a man named Carl, who wrote about his own struggles since coming home from deployment 10 years ago. He thanked Hank for sharing his story, said it gave him courage to adopt a rescue pup himself. Hank sat in his recliner with that letter for a long time. He read it twice, then a third time. Lucky came over and sat beside him, resting his chin on the armrest. "We did that," Hank said softly. "You and me." He wrote Carl back the next day, told him about the park, the pumpkin dog food experiment, the fair, invited him to come by sometime if he wanted company. Letters started coming in every few weeks. A few from other vets. One from a teacher who'd used their story to talk to her class about kindness. Another from a widower who said he finally went to the shelter near his home and came back with a deaf beagle named Charlie. Hank didn't think of himself as someone people wrote letters to, but they kept coming. He started carrying an extra ball to the park, just in case someone wanted to throw it. More often than not, a kid or a neighbor or some passerby would take him up on it. Lucky didn't mind sharing. He seemed to love the attention. One cloudy afternoon, a young man came up while Hank was tying his boot. "Hey," the guy said, a little hesitant. Hank stood and turned. The guy looked about 30, with buzzed hair and a nervous fidget. "You're the guy with the dog, right? The one from the brochure?" "I guess I am," Hank said, unsure where this was going. "I just wanted to say thanks. I didn't think it'd matter, but it did. Your story. I've been kinda stuck, but I went down to the shelter last week. Her name's Molly. She's got 3 legs and chews my shoes, but I don't know. She's something." Hank smiled. "She's yours. That's what she is." The man grinned and nodded. "Yeah, thanks, really." After he left, Hank watched Lucky chase a butterfly across the grass. For the first time in years, Hank let himself think about the word future. Not in the vague, heavy way, but with possibility. Color. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and rain tapped against the roof, Hank sat beside the fire, with Lucky sprawled across his feet. He read another letter. This one was from a teenage boy who'd lost his dad and found comfort in walking the neighbor's dog every afternoon. The letter ended with, "If I ever get a dog, I'm naming him Lucky too." Hank folded the letter and smiled. Lucky snored, tail thumping gently against the floor. "You got fans, Fuzzball," Hank whispered. "Hope you're not letting it go to your head." The next day, Lucky got his grooming appointment. Hank had been nervous about leaving him with strangers, but the groomer, a soft-spoken man named Clay, treated the dog like royalty. When Hank came back an hour later, he barely recognized him. "You clean up all right?" he said, inspecting the fluffy coat and trimmed fur. "Look at you. Practically fancy." Lucky barked proudly. Clay handed over a small bag. "A little something extra. Some treats, a toy, and a brush. Figured he earned it." Hank nodded. "He always does." They walked back out into the crisp afternoon. Hank looked at the people around him, folks walking their dogs, chatting over coffee, kids riding bikes, and realized how much more connected he felt these days. Like he belonged. It wasn't all perfect. He still had nights where the dreams came, still had days where something triggered a memory he didn't want. But now, when that happened, there was a soft paw on his arm, or a warm weight against his legs, a reminder that the world still had good in it. And Hank didn't feel quite so alone. As they walked through the town square that evening, someone called out from across the street. "Hey, Hank, when's Lucky running for mayor?" Hank chuckled. "He's too honest. Wouldn't stand a chance." Laughter echoed down the sidewalk. Lucky barked like he agreed. And Hank kept walking, heart light, stride steady, beside the little dog who had once been left for nothing and had become everything. It started with the couch. One Tuesday morning, Hank came into the living room with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a local newspaper folded under the other arm. He stopped dead in his tracks. Lucky was stretched across the couch like royalty, front paws hanging off one side, his head perched on a pillow, tail thumping slowly against the armrest. He looked up with wide, innocent eyes, then yawned. "Really?" Hank said. "That's what we're doing now?" Lucky let out a soft chuff and flopped over onto his side, with all the concern of a king ignoring his subject. Hank sighed, set down the paper, and sat in his recliner. "Fine, but don't drool on my cushion. I mean it." He sipped his coffee, watching the dog settle into a deeper nap. There had been a time, not that long ago, when Lucky wouldn't get more than a few feet from the door, when he'd flinch at loud noises and wouldn't eat unless Hank sat next to him. And now here he was, sprawled out on furniture like he owned the place. Hank smiled. He liked this version. The morning passed with quiet ease. Hank read the news, threw in a load of laundry, then headed outside to rake the yard. Fall had started to creep in around the edges of Ridgely, and the trees were giving up their leaves in waves. The scent of damp earth and smoke was everywhere. Lucky trotted after him, sniffing every leaf pile like it might contain treasure. Hank worked in steady rhythm, listening to the rake scrape across the ground and the occasional bark when Lucky caught a squirrel halfway up a tree. "You're never gonna catch one," Hank muttered, "but I admire your commitment." Halfway through the second pile, a voice called out from the sidewalk. "That dog still think he's people?" Hank looked up to see Ron from the park, leaning on his bicycle with a grin. The man had a way of showing up just when things were too quiet. "Worse," Hank said. "He thinks he's in charge." Ron chuckled. "Might not be wrong. You coming to the chili cook-off this weekend?" Hank paused. "Didn't know there was one. Town Square. Saturday afternoon. Free to taste? $10 to compete? You and the mutt should show your faces. Folks will be glad to see you." Hank nodded. "Maybe." Ron gave a little salute and pedaled off, leaving a faint squeak of bicycle tires in his wake. Back inside, Hank sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a pad of paper. He wasn't much for cooking outside his comfort zone, but chili was chili. He could handle that. Besides, Lucky loved when the house smelled like meat. "All right," he said. "What's our secret weapon gonna be?" Lucky barked. "No, I'm not putting peanut butter in it. That's for your snacks." He settled on a simple recipe with just enough heat to be interesting. By Thursday, the pot on the stove was bubbling away, filling the house with warm, peppery aromas. Lucky sat like a statue by the counter, tail sweeping the floor in anticipation. Saturday came quicker than Hank expected. He loaded up the pot, a stack of bowls, and Lucky into the truck. Downtown Ridgely was alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and clattering spoons. Long tables were set up along the square, each manned by folks with crock pots and secret spices. Hank got assigned a spot near the middle, under a red and white striped canopy. Lucky laid down under the table like he belonged there, greeting every child that came near with a happy tail wag and the occasional nose nudge. People drifted by, sampling bowls and chatting. A man with a deep laugh tried Hank's chili and gave a thumbs up. An older woman asked for seconds. And soon, there was a small line. Someone recognized Lucky and pointed. "That's the dog from the brochure!" And just like that, the crowd thickened. Not for Hank's chili, but for the story. People asked about Lucky, where he came from, how he was doing. One woman even pulled out her phone and showed Hank a picture of her own rescue pup, adopted because of Lucky's face in the community center flyer. Hank handed out chili and listened to story after story. It was overwhelming, but not in a bad way. In a strange, hopeful way. Near the end of the afternoon, a man with a camera approached. "You mind if I take a picture for the town website?" Hank hesitated. Lucky barked once. "Go ahead," Hank said. The man snapped a photo of Hank leaning on the table, ladle in hand, with Lucky at his feet. Then he thanked them and disappeared into the crowd. As the event wrapped up, the mayor took the stage to announce the winners. Hank didn't expect anything. "Third place," the mayor called out, "goes to a first-time contestant and a very familiar face around here, Hank Walker and Lucky." There was a round of applause, and someone handed Hank a small ribbon and a $50 gift card to the local grocery store. Hank gave Lucky a scratch behind the ears. "Guess we'll be eating steak tonight." That night, they sat on the back porch with 2 plates. One for Hank, one with a bit of steak chopped up for Lucky. The stars were out, the air was crisp, and the world felt more open than it had in years. Hank leaned back in his chair. "You keep getting us into things, you know that?" Lucky barked softly. The following week brought a shift. A neighbor knocked on Hank's door, asking if he'd be willing to help fix a broken fence. Said he heard Hank was good with tools and always home. Hank agreed. Then another asked if he'd be interested in helping with a community garden project on the edge of town. Just a few hours a week. And then, the library asked if Hank and Lucky would come by for the children's reading hour, just to sit while the kids read stories out loud. Each request surprised him. And yet, each time, he said yes. Because every time he stepped out, Lucky was there, right beside him. One afternoon, while sitting on the library floor, surrounded by kids taking turns reading pages from picture books, Hank felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. It didn't matter that it came in the form of a shaggy dog sprawled across a rug while children giggled and showed him illustrations. It didn't matter that his knees hurt when he sat too long, or that he still struggled to sleep some nights. This mattered. This was real. The library director offered him a small stipend. Hank declined. "We're just here for story time," he said. "He likes the attention." A few weeks later, a teenage boy named Tyler came up to him after story hour. Skinny, pale, and quiet. He waited until most of the other kids had left. "Can I pet your dog?" "Of course," Hank said. Tyler sat on the floor and slowly reached out. Lucky sniffed his hand and licked his fingers. "He's soft," the boy said. "Don't tell him that. He thinks he's tough." Tyler smiled. It was the first smile Hank had seen from him. Over the next few visits, Tyler stayed longer. He helped Hank carry books, brought treats for Lucky, and even asked if he could walk him once around the library grounds. Hank watched from the window as the boy and the dog walked side by side under the trees. Something in Tyler's shoulders seemed lighter. Later, Hank learned from the librarian that Tyler's father had passed away the year before. The boy hadn't spoken much since, didn't have many friends, but he came back every week for Lucky. That night, Hank gave Lucky an extra treat. "You're doing good work, Fuzzball," he said. Lucky sneezed in approval. Winter arrived with a quiet snowfall. Ridgely transformed into a picture book village, all soft lights and muffled footsteps. Hank wasn't much for holidays, but this year he bought a small tree and let Lucky pick out a toy from the pet store. Christmas Eve was spent watching a black and white movie with a blanket over their legs and the fire crackling in the hearth. At one point, Hank looked down and found Lucky watching him instead of the screen. "Yeah," Hank said softly. "Me too." They didn't need to say what it was. They just knew. As the new year approached, Hank got a letter from the community center. They were hosting a winter banquet and wanted to recognize a few folks who'd made a difference that year. He almost tossed it. But then he looked at Lucky, curled up on the rug with a chewed-up reindeer plush under one paw, and thought maybe it wouldn't be so bad. He RSVP'd yes. On the night of the banquet, he wore his cleanest flannel shirt and brushed Lucky until he looked like a show dog. The center was decorated with twinkling lights, long tables covered in food, and a stage at the front. When Hank's name was called, he hesitated, then stood. Peggy from the center said a few words about compassion, community, and how one small act of kindness had rippled through their town. Then she handed Hank a framed photo, one of the brochure pictures, Lucky looking regal. The applause was warm, honest. Hank nodded, took the photo, and returned to his seat. He didn't need to say anything. Lucky barked once, and that was enough. Later, driving home through the quiet streets, Hank looked at the photo resting on the dashboard. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like he'd done something big. He just felt whole. Lucky stretched out on the seat beside him, eyes half-lidded, content. "Not bad for a couple of strays, huh?" Hank said. The dog didn't answer. Didn't need to. February in Ridgely always came with a stubborn kind of cold, the kind that worked its way through jackets and boots and made your bones remember every injury you ever had. Hank felt it more now than he used to. His knees ached when he got out of bed in the morning, His back popped when he bent over to lace his boots, and even Lucky's joints seemed a little stiffer on colder days. But neither of them let it slow them down too much. They still made their daily walk through the park, bundled in Hank's case, Shaggy in Lucky's. The wind whipped around them, scattering the last of the dead leaves and making the pine trees creak above. Lucky trotted ahead, nose to the ground, chasing smells only he could identify. Hank had started carrying a small thermos of coffee on their walks. Some of the other park regulars had disappeared for the season, retreating to warm houses and shorter routines, but a few remained. Ron, true to form, still patrolled the park paths with a rake and a never-ending supply of small talk. "Still braving it, huh?" Ron said one frosty morning. "I've been through worse," Hank replied. "And he doesn't care if it's raining fire." Lucky barked and rolled in a patch of frost. Ron laughed. "Dogs got no sense," he said, "but they sure make the days easier." That night, as snowflakes started to fall outside, Hank sat at the kitchen table scribbling a shopping list. He wasn't much for Valentine's Day, hadn't been since he was a teenager with greasy hair and more acne than confidence. But the library was planning something for the kids, a card-making event, and Peggy had asked if Hank and Lucky could come by again. "We'll have cookies," she said, "and construction paper. The kids love Lucky. They want him to be their Valentine." Hank chuckled at the memory. "He's not giving out kisses. Just tail wags, that's plenty." So he added a few things to the list. Treats for the kids. Some new tennis balls for Lucky. Maybe even a small red bandana, if he could find one. At the store, he wandered through the seasonal aisle, a little overwhelmed by the sea of pink and red. But eventually, he found what he needed. A bag of chocolate hearts, a box of markers, and a little cloth bandana that said "Love Pup" in white stitching. Lucky tolerated the bandana with noble patience. At the library event, kids gathered around with glue sticks and crayons, cutting hearts out of paper and writing messages to their parents and classmates. Lucky sat in the center of the rug, like a living mascot. Every so often, a child would hand him a paper heart or press a sticker to his fur. He didn't mind. Hank kept a close eye on him, brushing off glitter when it got too much. Tyler was there too. The teenager had grown more confident, more vocal, and now helped the younger kids write their names or pick out colors. Hank noticed he never strayed far from Lucky. Peggy came over midway through and handed Hank a paper heart of her own. It had a drawing of Lucky on it, rough but charming. "You've become a tradition here," she said. "Kids look forward to you." Hank smiled. "He's the draw. I'm just the driver." Later that evening, back at home, Hank placed the paper heart on the fridge next to Lucky's photo. It made the kitchen look a little brighter. March came in with slush and mud. The snow melted in patches, revealing flattened grass and forgotten bits of winter. Lucky took to jumping over puddles like they were lava. Hank walked a little slower now, careful with each step. One morning, as he was pouring food into Lucky's bowl, he noticed the dog wasn't at his usual post by the pantry. Instead, Lucky was still lying on his bed in the living room, head resting on his front paws. "Hey," Hank said. "Breakfast time." Lucky raised his head but didn't get up. Hank walked over, crouched beside him. "You okay?" The dog's eyes were clear, but his energy wasn't there. It worried Hank. He called the vet's office and made an appointment for that afternoon. It was the same clinic that had seen Lucky after the dumpster. Dr. Wilcox, a tall, soft-spoken man with a mustache and steady hands, greeted them warmly. "He's just been off," Hank explained. "Not sick, exactly. Just slow. The vet nodded and did a full exam. Lucky stood still, cooperative as always. "He's not in pain," Dr. Wilcox said after a while. "But he's getting older. Cold weather stiffens things. Might be some early arthritis. Nothing serious, just something to watch. We'll get him some joint supplements, maybe ease back on the longer walks for a bit." Hank nodded, relief flooding him. "All right." He bought the supplements, some softer bedding, and even a heated pad for Lucky's favorite spot under the window. Over the next few days, Lucky perked back up. Not to his wild puppy energy, but enough. He still chased the ball, still barked at the mail truck. He just took more naps in between. Hank started driving out to the lake trail instead of walking there. It was quieter this time of year, and the view of the water helped him think. Lucky seemed to enjoy the change too. Less walking, more sniffing and staring at ducks. One afternoon, they sat on a bench by the lake as the sun set behind the hills. Lucky rested his head on Hank's knee. "You take things slower now," Hank said. "Maybe that's good. Maybe I needed to slow down too." The wind blew gently through the reeds. A couple of teenagers fished nearby, laughing at something on a phone. Hank closed his eyes for a moment and just listened. Spring crept in at last. The air smelled different, the days stretched longer, and green began returning to the trees. The community garden project restarted, and Hank found himself pulling weeds and planting bulbs with a few other locals every Saturday morning. Lucky lounged in the sun nearby, occasionally sniffing a trowel or flopping across someone's feet. One of the volunteers, a woman named Ellen, who wore thick gloves and had a laugh like a song, took a liking to Lucky right away. "He's got an old soul," she said. "Yeah," Hank replied. "We match." Ellen smiled. "You both make the place feel lived in." They worked side by side for hours, chatting about tomatoes, squirrels, and the best way to keep rabbits out of lettuce beds. Hank didn't realize how much he missed casual conversation until it returned. Lucky made new friends every week. Kids, seniors, volunteers, even the mail carrier at the garden started carrying a biscuit just in case. It wasn't the life Hank had planned, but it was the one he'd been given. And day by day, he made peace with it. One Sunday morning, he found a note in his mailbox. It was from Tyler. "Hi, Hank. I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for letting me hang out with Lucky, but for showing me it's okay to have bad days. You made things better just by being around. Lucky, too. I want to volunteer at the shelter this summer. Maybe help other dogs like him. Just thought you should know." Hank read it twice. Then he folded it neatly and placed it with the other letters in the wooden box he kept by the fireplace. Lucky patted over and nudged his hand. "That kid's all right," Hank said. Lucky thumped his tail. As the weeks passed, Hank found himself invited to more things. A veterans' breakfast at the church, a dog walk fundraiser downtown, a birthday party for one of the kids from the library. He said yes more often than no. It wasn't because he felt obligated. It was because each time he saw how much Lucky meant to other people, and how much those moments meant to him. In May, the community center organized a field day, games, races, food stalls, and a pet parade. Peggy called Hank personally. "We need Lucky in that parade. He's practically our mascot." "I don't know about costumes," Hank warned. "No costumes, just pride." So they went. Lucky wore his bandana and strutted with the confidence of a dog who had won hearts across the county. Children cheered, adults clapped. Hank walked beside him, waving now and then. Someone handed them a ribbon that said, "Best Rescue." It was the smallest one, but it meant the most. That night, Hank placed it in a small frame next to the one from the chili cook-off. Lucky sat on the couch, tail gently thudding against the cushion. Hank sat beside him. "You're not just my dog anymore," he said. "You're everybody's." Lucky laid his head in Hank's lap and sighed. Outside, the world continued. But inside that little house in Ridgely, something quiet and steady bloomed. A bond. A rhythm. A life neither of them had expected, but one they were finally ready to live. By the time summer came around, the rhythm of Hank's days had become something steady and familiar. Walks with Lucky in the early morning before the heat kicked in, coffee at the kitchen table while birds sang from the pine trees outside, a few hours at the community garden or the library, then slow evenings on the porch as the sun sank behind the hills. It was a life Hank never would have imagined for himself, not back when everything still felt raw and uncertain. But now, it fit. It made sense. Lucky, for his part, had grown into a local legend. Kids waved when they saw him. Teenagers called out his name from bicycles. Someone at the gas station even asked if they could print his face on the side of a tote bag to raise funds for the shelter. Hank said no to that, but he appreciated the gesture. The vet's joint supplements helped a lot. Lucky wasn't as fast as he used to be, but his tail still wagged at full strength, and he could chase a ball with the best of them, as long as it didn't roll too far. Hank adjusted. Shorter walks, more breaks, and an old fleece blanket in the truck bed so Lucky could ride along when he was too tired to trot back. The shelter, inspired by the stories pouring in about Hank and Lucky, invited them to speak at a fundraiser barbecue. Hank almost turned it down, but Peggy from the community center encouraged him. "You don't have to give a speech," she said. "Just tell your story. People want to hear it." So one Saturday afternoon, Hank found himself standing under a white event tent with a microphone in one hand, and Lucky sitting patiently beside him. The crowd was relaxed, folks holding paper plates and sodas, music playing from a nearby speaker. He kept it short. "I found Lucky behind a dumpster. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. I wasn't doing so great myself, if I'm honest, but we took a chance on each other. Turns out sometimes the thing you rescue ends up saving you right back." There was quiet applause, a few nods, some teary eyes. Hank scratched Lucky's ears and stepped down. That was all he had to say. That was enough. After the event, a young couple approached him. The man had a buzz cut and deep lines around his eyes, despite looking no older than 30. "We just adopted a dog yesterday," he said. "We were nervous about it, but your story, it helped." Hank shook his hand. "You'll be fine. Just listen to each other." Lucky sneezed, then wagged his tail as if to seal the advice. Later that night, Hank sat on the back porch with a cold drink in one hand and the warm night air wrapping around him. Lightning bugs blinked in the distance. Lucky rested on his side, chin on his paws. "You're turning me into a public speaker now," Hank said. "Didn't see that one coming." Lucky let out a sleepy huff. July brought more change. Tyler, the teenager from the library, started volunteering full-time at the shelter. He even asked Hank if he could help walk some of the tougher dogs, the ones still skittish around people. "They calm down when I'm with Lucky," Tyler said. "Maybe I can do that for them too." Hank drove him over a few times a week, watched him grow more confident, more sure of himself, watched him bond with a lanky hound named Radar, who barked too much and had a tail like a whip. By the end of the month, Tyler had adopted him. He came over to Hank's house one afternoon with Radar in tow. "Thought maybe we could walk them together." So they did. Around the block, past the post office, down toward the little lake trail. 2 dogs, 2 people, a conversation that flowed easier than it used to. "I used to think nobody got it," Tyler said quietly. Like the stuff that sticks with you, the stuff that makes it hard to get out of bed. Hank nodded. I still think that some days. Tyler looked at Radar, then back at Hank. But now it feels different. Not fixed, just shared. Hank smiled. That's the trick, I think. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to not be alone in it. August brought a heat wave that made everything slow down. The garden shriveled a little. Kids ran through sprinklers in their yards, and Lucky spent most afternoons sprawled across the coolest patch of kitchen tile he could find. Hank adjusted the walking times, got a little fan for the porch, and made sure Lucky always had fresh water in the shade. During one of those hot afternoons, a man showed up at the door. Hank didn't recognize him at first. He was older, with a slight limp and a sun-leathered face, but when he spoke, something clicked. You're Walker, right? 2nd Battalion? Hank nodded slowly. That's right. The man smiled. Name's Grant. We crossed paths in Ramadi. You probably don't remember me, but I remembered you. Heard about you from a friend who saw that story in the paper. Figured I'd come by. They sat on the porch for hours, two men with shared scars and overlapping memories. Lucky lay at their feet like he'd always been part of the unit. They didn't talk about war, not exactly, but they talked around it. And sometimes, that was enough. Grant stayed in town a few days. He and Hank went fishing, hit the diner for lunch, even took the dogs to the park. When he left, he shook Hank's hand hard. You gave me something back, Grant said. Didn't know I'd lost it until I got here. After he drove off, Hank stood by the driveway for a long time, watching the dust settle. He looked down at Lucky. You keep doing that, he said. You keep bringing people back to life. September rolled in with cooler nights and golden skies. The high school football season started, and Hank found himself going to the Friday night games again. Lucky came too, wearing a little blue scarf in the school colors. The kids loved it. Parents waved. Teachers nodded. One night, a boy about 9 or 10 sat beside Hank in the bleachers. He didn't say anything at first, just reached out and patted Lucky's head. My brother used to come here, he said. He's in the army now. My mom cries sometimes, but I think it's okay. Hank nodded slowly. Crying's all right. Doesn't mean something's wrong. Just means it matters. The boy nodded. Then he smiled. I think Lucky understands stuff like that. He does, Hank said. He really does. As the lights of the field glowed against the autumn sky, Hank sat with a dog by his side and a small hand resting gently on Lucky's back. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, he looked forward to finding out. And Lucky? Lucky just wagged his tail and kept listening. October came in wearing gold and red, draping the trees of Ridgely in color so rich it almost looked painted. The mornings turned crisp, the afternoons warm enough for porch sitting, and the smell of wood smoke began to drift through the air like a promise. Hank started wearing his old green jacket again, the one with the elbow patches and the torn lining that he never bothered fixing. Lucky, growing a bit more silver in the fur around his muzzle, still followed him everywhere, though now he took longer to stretch before getting out of bed. The annual fall festival took over the town square on the second Saturday of the month. Hay bales, pumpkins, food trucks, and tents selling everything from homemade candles to carved wooden signs lined the sidewalks. There was even a pie-eating contest and a scarecrow competition. Peggy from the community center had roped Hank into helping with the booth for the library. You just have to sit there and hand out bookmarks, she'd said. Lucky will do all the real work. So Hank sat under a striped awning while Lucky laid beside him in a fleece-lined dog bed, surrounded by kids who alternated between petting him and asking if he was going to wear a Halloween costume. "No costumes," Hank said firmly, sipping cider from a paper cup. "He's already more popular than I'll ever be. Don't need to dress him like a taco." One of the kids laughed and ran off to tell her parents that Lucky didn't need a costume because he was already famous. Later that afternoon, a group of students from the local middle school stopped by with a camera and a microphone. They were doing a video project on community heroes, and Lucky had made the list. "We want to interview both of you," one boy said, voice cracking with nerves. "Just a few questions. You don't have to say much." Hank looked at Lucky, who thumped his tail in approval. "All right," Hank said, "but he gets final edit." The kids laughed and got their footage, clips of Lucky wagging at the crowd, Hank answering questions about how they met, what life was like before and after, and what it meant to be part of something again. "You've helped a lot of people," one girl said as they packed up. "More than you probably know." Hank smiled. "He did most of it. I just followed along." That night, Hank and Lucky took the long way home. The trees arched above the road like a tunnel of fire and light. Leaves drifted down, catching in Lucky's fur. Hank didn't brush them off. They looked good on him. As they passed the old Ridgely Theater, Hank noticed a sign on the door. It was closed for repairs, but a flyer was taped to the window. Veterans Appreciation Night. Stories, songs, and supper. November 11th. All welcome. Hank stared at it for a moment. He wasn't big on being recognized, but the words stories and supper felt safe enough. He made a mental note. Back home, the phone rang. It was Tyler, calling from the shelter. "We just took in a dog who reminds me a little of Lucky," he said. "Not in how he looks, but the way he watches everything. Like he's waiting to find out if he's allowed to stay." Hank leaned against the kitchen counter, listening to Lucky snore softly from the other room. "Give him time," Hank said, "and space. But make sure he knows someone's there. That part matters more than you'd think." Tyler paused. "You want to come by this week? He might like meeting Lucky." "Yeah," Hank said. "We'll be there." The dog's name was Boomer, big, black, lanky, and nervous. He had one bent ear and a tail that only wagged halfway. Lucky approached him slowly. No rush, no noise, just the steady presence of a dog who'd once been scared, too. Boomer sniffed. Lucky sniffed back. Then they both laid down beside each other like they'd always known how. Tyler looked at Hank with raised eyebrows. "You'd think they rehearsed that." "They don't need to. Dogs just get it." They stayed a while. Hank talked to the other volunteers, helped fix a broken latch on one of the outdoor gates, and gave Tyler a ride home when his bike chain broke. When he dropped the boy off, Tyler said, "Thanks for still being around." Hank didn't answer right away, just nodded. The following week, he got a letter in the mail. This one came from a man in another state. Indiana. Said he'd been following Hank and Lucky's story online ever since someone posted a video of them at the chili cook-off last year. He'd just gotten out of rehab, had a dog now, and for the first time in years felt like maybe he had something worth fighting for again. "I thought I'd write to the guy who started it all," the letter read. "Because sometimes, knowing you're not the only one makes all the difference." Hank read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box by the fireplace. He didn't have the words to answer it just yet. On the 1st of November, the wind picked up, shaking the last of the leaves from the trees. The days grew shorter, the mornings darker. Lucky didn't like getting up as early now, and Hank let him sleep in. They adjusted again. They always did. One morning, Hank woke to find Lucky standing at the door, tail swaying gently. It was still dark out. "You want to go?" Lucky barked once. So they went. The streets were empty, the sky just starting to lighten with hints of pink and lavender. Their breath came in soft clouds, boots and paws crunching against the scattered leaves. No destination, just motion. That was enough. At the end of the block, they passed the Thompson house. Mr. Thompson sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, his oxygen tank beside him. "Morning, Hank," he wheezed. "Dog's looking spry today." "Woke up early," Hank said. "Figured we'd follow the tail." Mr. Thompson chuckled. "Best compass there is." They kept walking. That night, Hank sat down with a notebook. Not to write a letter, but to list the names of everyone who had written to him since that first article ran. He tried to remember what each one had said, how they'd signed off. It felt like adding stones to a path. Markers of where they'd been and how far they'd come. Lucky slept nearby, the tips of his paws twitching in a dream. "Keep dreaming," Hank said quietly. "We've still got places to go." Hank had never much cared for November. It was the in-between month, after the leaves had mostly fallen, before the snow made everything look clean and new. It was gray, usually, and quiet in a heavy sort of way. But this year, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the town had started preparing for the Veterans Appreciation Night weeks ahead of time, stringing lights across the old Ridgely Theater and repainting the entrance. Or maybe it was just that this November, Hank wasn't going into it alone. The day before the event, he and Lucky stopped by the community center, where Peggy and a few volunteers were stuffing gift bags with handwritten notes, miniature American flags, and little jars of homemade apple butter. "You two coming tomorrow?" Peggy asked without looking up. "Wouldn't miss it," Hank said. "Lucky's got a spot on the program. He's riding in on a wagon." Hank blinked. "A what?" Peggy pointed across the room. Someone had painted a little red wagon with stars and stripes, complete with a cushion inside and a sign that read, "Honorary Grand Pup." Lucky sniffed it, then sat beside it like he understood. Hank chuckled. "Well, he's earned it." Peggy smiled. "So have you." That night, Hank ironed a shirt he hadn't worn in a long time. Light blue, with buttons that actually matched. He laid it out on the back of the couch, then filled Lucky's water bowl, topped off the food container, and sat down to go over the letter he'd finally decided to write. It was to the man in Indiana. The one who'd said Lucky gave him something to fight for. Hank kept it simple. "I've never been much good with words, but I wanted to thank you for writing. It means something, knowing our story traveled that far. You're not alone. I wasn't either, even when I thought I was. Keep going. That's all any of us can do." He signed it and sealed the envelope before he could second-guess himself. The next day, Ridgely seemed to glow despite the gray skies. Flags hung from every porch post. Kids lined the sidewalks with signs and small drums. The Ridgely Theater, freshly scrubbed and humming with activity, opened its doors to a line of guests stretching half a block. Hank parked a few streets over and walked with Lucky at his side. He wore the ironed shirt and his old service jacket. Lucky wore his red bandana and a gentle patience Hank had come to admire. Inside, the theater buzzed with chatter. Long tables had been pushed to the sides of the room to make space for the small stage. Veterans and families mingled. Tyler waved from across the room, Radar sitting neatly beside him in a matching bandana. Ellen from the garden gave Hank a hug, and pressed a wrapped cookie into his hand. "Oatmeal," she said. "Still warm." Lucky was ushered toward the front, where the little wagon waited. The kids who would pull him were practicing, giggling as they debated whether Lucky would bark during the music or fall asleep. He did neither. He simply climbed in, circled once, and lay down like he was born for it. Hank took a seat near the front. The program began: speeches, songs, stories. An older man read a poem about homecomings. A younger one shared a letter he'd written to his late father. There were tears, but also laughter. Even applause. Then came Lucky's turn. The kids wheeled him slowly across the stage while someone read a short summary of his story, found behind a dumpster, adopted by a veteran, now a therapy dog in everything but title. They spoke of the letters, the shelter work, the countless lives touched. And finally, they asked Hank to join them. He stood, a little stiff in the knees, and walked up beside the wagon. Someone handed him the microphone. He didn't plan to speak, but then he looked out at the crowd and saw faces. Familiar, kind, open. And he saw Lucky, watching him with those steady eyes. So he spoke. "I thought I was done. A few years back, I didn't think I had much left to give. I kept to myself. Figured that was safer, easier. But then I found this dog behind a gas station, cold and shaking. I brought him home because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know I needed him. Didn't know he'd give me a reason to open the door again." The room was quiet. What I've learned since then is this: healing doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it's not a big moment. Sometimes it's a walk, a shared meal, a nudge from a wet nose when you can't sleep. Lucky didn't just change my life. He reminded me I still had one. He paused. Then, softer, "I'm thankful. For him. For all of you. For second chances." There was applause, loud, low, honest. He stepped down. Lucky wagged his tail once. That was enough. After the ceremony, people came to shake his hand, to pet Lucky, to share their own stories. One woman had a picture of her brother's dog saved on her phone. Another man said his grandson had started reading again because of the library visits. The stories folded into one another like bricks in a wall Hank hadn't realized they'd been building together. Later that evening, back at the house, Hank set the program from the event on the table. He poured a splash of cider into a glass and sat beside Lucky, who had immediately taken over the couch. "You were the hit," Hank said. "I'm just the sidekick." Lucky huffed, eyes half closed. For a while, they just sat in the quiet. Outside, wind rustled the last of the dry leaves. The furnace clicked on. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. Hank reached down and ran a hand through Lucky's fur. It was a little wiry now, a little grayer, but still warm. He didn't know what the winter would bring. Maybe snow, maybe more letters, maybe something they hadn't expected. But they'd be here, together. And that was enough to carry them forward. A few days later, Hank and Lucky returned to the shelter. Boomer had been adopted by a retired teacher who came in every Tuesday to read aloud to the dogs. Tyler had started a blog, writing about dog behavior, teenage recovery, and the weird, funny things that happened when dogs met kids. "You ever think of writing a book?" Hank asked, as Tyler helped stack boxes in the storage room. "I think about it," Tyler said. "Sometimes I start, then I stop." "Start again," Hank replied. "That's how I got here. I just kept starting again." Tyler nodded. "Yeah. Okay." They loaded a few more crates before heading outside. Lucky trotted along beside them, Ears perked. In the parking lot, a family was walking toward the building. A father, a mother, 2 kids. And between them, a scrawny brown mutt on a red leash, tugging forward with excitement. The mother saw Lucky and stopped. "That's him! That's the dog from the picture!" The kids knelt down, holding out their hands. Lucky walked over calmly, wagging, letting them pet his ears. The scrawny mutt barked twice and tried to jump forward. "Looks like he wants to be famous too," the father said. Hank smiled. "He already is. He just doesn't know it yet." They watched the family walk inside. Tyler leaned against the truck. "You ever think this would be your life?" he asked. "No," Hank said. "Not for a second." "But you're glad it is?" Hank looked down at Lucky. "Every day." They stayed a while longer, talking, laughing, watching the sun drop low. Then they climbed into the truck, Lucky in the middle, head resting on Hank's leg. As the road stretched ahead, the town glowing soft in the evening light, Hank felt something quiet settle inside him. Not the kind of quiet that echoed, the kind that felt like peace. The snow came early that December. Light at first, just a dusting across rooftops and porches, but enough to quiet the town in that way only winter can. Hank woke to the kind of silence he'd once dreaded, the heavy hush of too many mornings spent alone, staring at the ceiling. But now, it came with the warm weight of a dog curled beside his bed and the gentle hum of life, still waiting to be lived. He sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and rubbed his knees before standing. Lucky stretched, groaning a little, then shook his coat out and blinked up at him. "Snow out there," Hank said, heading to the window. Lucky sniffed the air, then padded over to sit beside him. The street was blanketed in white, the trees bare and still. A pair of kids were already stomping down the sidewalk in snow boots too big for their feet. "Let's go see how the world's doing," Hank said. They bundled up, Hank in his thick coat and wool cap, Lucky in the same old red bandana, faded now but still proud. They walked slowly, snow crunching underfoot, past mailboxes topped with white caps and fences trimmed in icicles. Everything felt slower, quieter. Even the usual sounds of the town, the hum of the diner, the barking of backyard dogs, seemed muted by the snow. Down at the park, the benches were half buried, and the pond was beginning to freeze at the edges. Lucky moved with a little less bounce than he used to, but his tail still wagged at every squirrel track and distant bark. Ron was there, of course, pushing a shovel down the path in deliberate lines. "Thought I'd find you two out here," he said, straightening up with a grin. "We don't hibernate," Hank said. "Could have fooled me. I've got 2 labs at home who won't leave the fireplace." Lucky trotted over to greet him, and Ron scratched his ears. "Still the best-looking mayor this town's never elected," Ron said. "You hear about that family from up north? The one that moved into the old Sanders house?" "No," Hank said. "Brought their rescue down with them. Said they adopted because their kid read a story online about a dog named Lucky, who changed a veteran's life." Hank let out a low breath. "That's so?" Ron nodded. "Word gets around. Even snow can't slow it down." They chatted a bit longer, then moved on. Back home, Hank put on coffee and dropped a couple logs into the fireplace. Lucky took his usual place on the rug, nose twitching as the heat crept out. Hank sat nearby, watching the flames. A letter sat unopened on the table. He'd picked it up at the post office the day before and hadn't read it yet. It was from a woman named Carol in Kentucky. The return address was neat and small, the kind he associated with old hands and steady care. He opened it slowly. "Dear Mr. Walker, I hope you don't mind a stranger writing. I saw your story in a newsletter passed around at the assisted living center where my brother lives. He's a veteran, like you. Quiet. Keeps to himself. Doesn't speak much about the past. But he smiled when I showed him the photo of you and Lucky. He said, 'I think I could do that.' Next week, we're visiting the shelter. I'll send you a picture if we come home with someone. Thank you for reminding him he still has something to offer. Sincerely, Carol L." Hank folded the letter, hands still for a moment. Then he leaned forward and set it gently in the wooden box by the fireplace. It was nearly full now. That evening, the power flickered once as wind rattled the windows. The storm was coming harder now, and the world outside disappeared behind sheets of white. Hank added another log to the fire and fixed a plate of leftover roast for himself. Lucky got the same, smaller portion. No onions. They ate in companionable silence, the kind of quiet built from knowing rather than needing to say. After dinner, Hank brought out an old photo album. He hadn't touched it in a while. It was mostly filled with people who weren't around anymore. His parents, a couple of old friends, some Marines he hadn't seen in decades. He flipped through slowly, page by page, letting the memories land where they wanted. He didn't try to sort them, didn't push them away. Eventually, he reached the more recent pages, a picture from the fair, Lucky in his bandana, another from the library, surrounded by kids holding books, a grainy one from the park, Ron in the background with his rake, Lucky leaping mid-air after a tennis ball. He added a new photo, one from Veterans Appreciation Night, printed at the drugstore just last week. Him and Lucky on stage, both looking out at the crowd. He slid it into the sleeve. "There we go," he murmured. "One more for the story." Lucky had moved to the couch, tail curled over his nose. Hank stood, walked over, and sat beside him. The dog shifted, rested his head on Hank's thigh. The storm howled outside, but the room was warm. The fire crackled. The album rested on the table. The box of letters sat full beside it. "Didn't think this is where we'd end up," Hank said quietly, running a hand through the shaggy fur. "But I'm glad we did." Lucky didn't move, but Hank could feel the soft rhythm of his breath, steady and slow. He leaned back, staring at the fire, listening. Somewhere out there, someone was reading a letter. Somewhere else, a child was telling a new friend about the dog who helped a man start over. Maybe someone was driving home from a shelter, a new leash in the back seat. It was hard to say where things began or ended, but Hank figured that was the point. The fire dimmed, the wind eased, and in that small house on the edge of Ridgely, with snow blanketing the world outside and a dog pressed close beside him, Hank Walker closed his eyes and smiled. Because no matter how far the story reached, this was where it always came home.